That's the culture, though. And I think on that note, let's ease into it, boys. Welcome to Shop Talk. If you guys are listening, welcome, welcome. If you're gonna hop on and you want to do some visuals, we're on YouTube. There, you can see some of the images and the guys' faces that we pull up. But we are on episode 101 with our late night special. We have two guests tonight: Angus Mulrooney, Brandon Ward. Hello, guys. Hello. Here are their vehicles. And tonight we are going to be talking about bespoke car bodywork. Very, very sweet episode. Very, I'm passionate about it. I'm excited for it. It's going to be a good one. You guys, let's do it.
Well, but generally the newest I go is like early 90s, and that's a hard stop for me. Not for personal reasons, but
So, between our two guests, we have a pretty clear contrast in terms of timeline on their vehicles. Obviously, Gus has an older vehicle range that he specializes in, and B, you have Brandon. You have a very more modern take on vehicles. But it's a good point to say like you guys both race and you both want the same outcome, but you both care about the aesthetics of your vehicles, right? You know,
hmm
the body work, the lines, the sculpturing, the aerodynamics, and then the engine and tuning is for another podcast, but it,
hmm
it
Well, I
is
think it's safe to say too that like there's no right or wrong solution to it. It's not like we're arguing here. It's just we're interested in different facets, and it all depends on what you're into, really. Again, no right or wrong. There's no hard stop. There's no black and white. It's all gray area, and it's all love. It's for me. It's just car culture is fun, and I dig it, man.
that's actually a good point you just brought up car culture because culture and identity. Some people would argue there is no identity or culture in cars, but there is a big argument for it. So, in your opinion, like how does one's identity then get brought into one sculpturing or restoring a car? We'll focus on the outside, on the exterior work of it.
I think I don't know. For me, man, it's a lot like when you wake up in the morning and you walk to your closet and you rip open the door and you're like, "What am I going to wear today?" Like your closet in a weird way is kind of like representative of who you are trying to portray yourself as. It's the same as like what kind of music you listen to. It's just personal interest, it's art, and it's expression is all it is. It's just
It's a
people are
reflection of yourself.
yeah, and people are different in kinds of beautiful ways, and cars are just another extension of that.
So your car culture is obviously more classic. How would you say like is it a very open community? Is it
Yeah,
how do they feel towards maybe the contrasting community that B is more involved in, where he goes to different car meets and different shows, but they're more modern. It's a
I'd say the old car scene is funny because there's like two types of guys. There's the guys who are like straight up like, oh, all these young kids don't get it. And then there's the other half of guys who are like, I'm so happy to see these young kids still doing it. And it all just comes down to like, I don't know, for me, it's perspective and maturity. It's like, as long as you're working on your car and you love it, I don't care what it is. Obviously I gravitate towards the older stuff, but yeah, it's funny. The old car world is weird like that. There's either really grumpy old men who are just pissed off to see anybody, work on anything with fiberglass, and then there's like chill old guys who are happy to see people just work on anything. So I don't know. It's a weird world.
B. How about you? How does
Actually,
your side of the culture view his side of the culture?
I'm gonna say like the way I see it, anyways, is everyone loves to see a little bit of everything. So whether it's a newer car or an older car, when you pull into like a car meet, for instance, everyone's judging or not judging, but everyone's appreciating what's pulling. So whether it's a new car or an older car, everyone likes. Each person makes their own car to be represent themselves, like Gus was saying. So if someone pulls in with a '67 Mustang, it's nice and clean and shiny. It's gonna be looked at just as good as and sometimes in some cases, even my age group, I guess, there's a lot of people that appreciate those cars more than cars now. with the car community, the way I see it, it's very open versus being kind of like stuck in old ways. How Gus was saying, either very grumpy and just stuck,
Yeah.
stuck in their own ways, or the other guys that are just like open about it and cool about
No, I'm fully with you, dude. I love to see people just appreciating guys doing what they want to do. Like I know I make fun of like the grumpy old dudes, but that's like a very minute factor. Like
it.
there's
Yeah,
not many of them left, and they're kind of dying out now. But they're fun. They're like cartoon characters. They're just grumpy old dudes, and I kind of love them too. So
yeah.
it's
For
all
sure.
love. That's the thing about
Oh,
cartoons.
Brandon,
it's very
can
yeah,
you
it's
do me a
very
favor? Can you just pull your mic over to your mouth? Just because you're cutting out a little
oh
bit during a little bit, but it wasn't anything bad. You should be
Oh, it's a podcast now. Now that we're
yeah.
adjusting mics, it's officially a podcast.
good. We're adjusting the mics. It's a podcast now. Hang on, should I fix mine? There we go.
Right on.
So let's talk materiality. Gus, we'll start off with you because in order of timeline here, the
Yeah.
metals. What's going on?
So it's funky. When you get into the older stuff, it's a weird realm that not many people really know about anymore. It's like a lot of forgotten knowledge. So a lot of people look at old cars and they think that it's just like simply steel, 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 but it goes way beyond that. A lot of the old cars that I'm into, and the reason I'm into them is just because the cars were pretty new. Like cars were a new concept. So people were trying to figure out what was going to work and what wasn't going to work. So if you really dig deep into history, it's crazy experimental, and you find out about all kinds of weird metals that people were trying to use. Like um, people were making cars out of magnesium for a little while, and magnesium itself is a flammable metal. So that's just like a recipe for disaster. But on the flip side, it was really light and it made cars go very fast. Um, Beyond that, early drag racers were, stamping fenders out of aluminum. The whole front end of the car was aluminum. Or even if it was a steel car, they would dip it. They would take it to like an Air Force base and dip it in an airplane acid tank and let the metal thin out for a few days. And then they pull it out of the acid tank and have like a paper thin sheet metal car. So it's, as far as cars go, it's typically always metal, but the kind of metal that they're made out of can be kind of curious sometimes. You don't always know. Sometimes it's aluminum, sometimes it's magnesium, sometimes it's steel. You get weird stuff from the 80s, like the DeLorean with stainless steel and stuff like that, but it's typically generally metal. There's not a lot of plastics or anything like that.
I think on our side, man, we're like we all have the same end goal, being light. At least for most part, when we're going for racing and stuff like that, we're looking for being able to be a light car, still look good. So for instance, like my car, the frame is made out of aluminum, which going towards saving weight. And then with like the body panels and stuff like that, using composite materials for that. The one plus side too, I guess, for my side is, we don't worry so much about like down the road how metals can rust, and damage like that down the road.
Oh, you're so
Yeah,
lucky.
yeah. So that's one of the
Dude,
one
The
of the biggest things.
materiality is crazy. The
Yeah.
differences too. So
yeah, for sure.
B, these composites, other than besides like the process, they're more lightweight, right? But
Hmm.
when you want to discuss, I guess, the similarities between, for example, Gus's, both of them can be handcrafted and molded and formed, but in just different ways, right?
I feel
Yeah,
like,
actually,
oh,
sorry,
good.
go.
I was just gonna say, like, I feel like at least with composites and stuff like that, like fiberglass and carbon fiber and stuff like that, is a little bit easier to work with. You're not using much, to bend the metal and get it exactly how you want. You're not with composites and stuff like that. You're able to just put them in a mold and get exactly what you want out of it. A little bit easier to work with.
Hmm. No,
And
I'd agree. I think it's also just it depends on what you're used to, right? Like at least from my perspective, and again, like I've got a fairly limited perspective in terms of like the modern stuff, but in terms of the old stuff, I am so much more comfortable approaching like steel panels and like To me, that seems relatively easy. Whereas with the newer stuff, like making molds sounds relatively complex, but to somebody like Brendan or somebody else who's, well versed in that, that could be there. It could be easy to them too. So it's just, it's perspective and it's what you're used to.
For sure.
Exactly. But they both
And
entail this artistic craft, right? Although they are
Oh,
different, they're also very similar. And the processes are crazy too. Like for the composites, there are guys that grab like styrofoam and foam block, and they will, they'll actually build up their their mold from that. I think I have an image of it here I can pull up. Yeah, here's one where we got guys. Oh, for those of you that don't know, carbon fiber here on the right on the bottom, it's a woven fiber from carbon, obviously in the name, and it's very strong and it's also very rigid, but only in its woven form. Another another form of carbon here is these shards of carbon. They're just chopped up, and both of these are fused with resin, and they are put into a press or or a vacuum, anything that has to do with any type of compression. And one actually, the one prior, this one here back in, I think it was 2008. This one was a forged composite by Lamborghini and Boeing, but the woven fabrics go back to like 1981. So these woven, and these were done by hand. These ones here, but the composites, these ones are a more modern craft here, and so they're put into the forges and the presses and things like
mhm.
that take a lot more
The stuff is
technology.
so amazing. It's just like it's the perfect blend of like art and science. And I think that's kind of like what really attracts a lot of like car guys, or just people, getting into the car community. It's like if you either have, you know, if people say left brain or right brain, like are you math minded or are you like, creative minded? It's like this is the perfect blend of the two worlds. And it's just a continuation throughout history. Like the materials change, but man, it's always art and science, and it's so cool to get into. Carbon fiber blows my mind.
It does. It's crazy. Well, while we're on the topic, let's talk about the tools that you use, guys,
Yeah, so
and
um
technology. Let's not forget technology, because power.
yeah, so
You do use power tools, and
for sure. And that's kind of the funny thing about working on old cars is that just because the cars are old doesn't mean that the tools you use have to be old. Like absolutely, a lot of these techniques and these styles and these, uh these these skills essentially are from like a old world. It doesn't mean that you have to use outdated tools. Some guys still do it and they are, hard as hell. I love those guys. I mean, that's bragging rights, but working on old cars doesn't have to be that hard. New tools makes it a lot easier. But typically when you're working on old cars, it's typically, welder, grinder, cutting wheels, stuff like that. When it comes to metal shaping, you get into really fancy stuff. You're using things like English wheels. You're using things like louver cutters and all kinds of funky stuff. And the list goes on and on and on. But at the end of the day, we're all trying to achieve the same goal. You've got an image in your head and you're just trying to create it. It's the same thing as when a musician picks up an instrument and they can hear a song in their head and they just are trying to create it. It's the exact same thing. So um, I know that, the tools are obviously going to be pretty different because, obviously metal is different than like composite materials. And I'm going to say there's just as many chemicals involved. I mean, wear your PPE, be safe. But
it's a lot of
it gets,
handwork too, right? It's yeah,
oh yeah,
it's
man.
it's handcraft. It's artisan. There's a lot of love, blood, sweat, and tears that goes into both forms, but I would say more so yours, right? It's you're forming materials from virtually nothing. You know, you're really making it your own. It becomes a bespoke, piece of work. It's a craft.
Absolutely,
How
man.
how long have you been working on the car behind you?
I don't want to talk about
Okay.
that.
And for those of our listeners who don't know exactly what bespoke means, it just means a work or a design that is specifically for one individual, and it's completely unique from anything else. So, for example, if Gus is taking his charger and anything that he does to it beyond the OEM modification, it then becomes a bespoke piece of work, and or other crafts as well. It's not just cars, but yes,
That's art, baby.
that's art. That's art. And B
That's the
for you.
beauty. That's I was gonna say that's the beauty of like the older cars, and you're able to like mold, make your own shapes and stuff with your metals versus like me, where I have to rely more on manufacturers to make certain parts for me because it's not I can't just bend composite materials and stuff like that. So
Art on its own,
Well,
you know?
I would probably disagree a little bit with that. Like I would say, like, yes, it is easier for Gus, right? And honestly, they don't really have any other choice because that's just
yeah,
the way things were done back then.
yeah,
But because of technology and tools now, guys are producing really cool works with their vehicles. Like in terms of like new composites, right? Like
mhm,
when I pulled up, like I've seen guys do this where they have these foam blocks and they literally carve these out with grinders, and they'll grind and they'll carve away from this geometry by hand or through or CNC machines, right? Like there is a technology side, but there is also the flip side of composites where, you know, for example, like back when composites first came out, like I said earlier, I believe it was like the 1970s, 1980s. These guys were hand rolling these woven carbon fiber sheets, you know, with resin and then letting that cure, right? So they were hand rolling these sheets, combining them with resin and getting that compression, and then letting it cure to create really really awesome geometries, man. Like here is I'll pull up another one where guys are doing some pretty cool things. Like this, these are some this is bespoke work, man. Like this is not OEM. Oh, you guys, let me get in the crop here.
Hmm.
Like so, this is a sketch, right? And this is actually the foam block that I showed you earlier, right? So
Hmm.
it's all custom. It's just not done in the same process, right? It's still bespoke work though.
Oh, it absolutely is, man. I am constantly astounded. If it's new or old, it's just like it's amazing to watch the process, no matter what it is. And the materials, yes, they're vastly different. The processes are vastly different, but it is so cool to see people pursuing that and creating whatever they dream up on their head. I absolutely adore that stuff.
So let's bring in some discussion then.
Hmm.
Do How do we feel about traditional craft skills? Do we feel like they're obsolete in this bespoke body work, car aesthetics, you know artisan field? What are we thinking?
I'd say it's all context. Like if you're trying to build a vehicle that is of a different era, then you're typically just by default, you kind of have to learn these old techniques. Thus, if that's a necessary thing to learn by necessity, it's not really obsolete, right? It might be less common for sure. It's definitely kind of like a niche thing to do. Not many people are restoring old vehicles or, building old cars these days. But if that's something you're interested in, you have to learn the processes. And by nature of having to learn them, then I guess they're not so obsolete, are they, right?
It's a fair point. That's a
I
fair
think
point.
to our like the modern cars, I would say it's more obsolete. Like on his side of the work because we didn't grow up with that type of work, so it's not much. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. Yeah.
At least in my point of view, we'd have to go out of our way to go and learn those processes versus Gus. Like that's how he grew up.
Yeah, especially if you're doing it
Learning.
yourself, is what you're saying.
Yeah,
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 exactly. And like at that point, like you already have a newer vehicle that is tuned to run with the materials and the body style, the aerodynamics. Like for you to go reinvent the wheel just to put an aluminum body panel on would make no sense for joining seams, like all of it. Like the whole formwork would just be a nightmare. And I've never even heard of anybody doing that. And
Oh yeah, no, the engineering just makes sense, right? Like if you're gonna be working on newer stuff, you use newer materials. It's just so much more cohesive that way. One gun, they'd be like, "What is this? What's going on? Don't do this, please."
yeah. So our position is obviously it's not obsolete. Then the traditional craft is very much alive. It's just a very niche market, and
It's niche.
it's also adapting too. Like it's very dynamic as the car aesthetic and just culture is. Like it's very dynamic. Like because there's so
Well,
many different vehicles. There's so many different aesthetics, different materiality. Like it's cool. It's always adapting as time goes on and as new materialities and processes and
Mhm.
designs and aesthetics develop too.
then you go to the grocery store.
All right, so our last, you know, little food for thought: can mass-produce works products be turned into artisan craft? What do you guys think? B, let's start with you because
You,
Gus, you've been going off for a while.
I know I've been ranting. Sorry.
oh no, you're good, dude. Give me an example of that. Like, what do you? You're saying like, can my like the the modern cars still be work of art?
Yeah, honestly, any car because no matter what vehicle is produced, not necessarily any vehicle. Some of them are like, one of five or like one of 100. Like they still come off at off a line, right? But for the most part, all of our vehicles are mass produced. So, in your experience, the vehicles that you've owned, can guys turn them into works of art?
Yeah, definitely, man. I mean, there's body kits, there's the newer cars too. There's just you I feel like you have a little bit more options with design, just because you're able to do like 3D scans and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, like Paul mentioned already, there's a lot of people that are going to buy a car factory and they're going to they're going to do their own modifications to it to make it present themselves, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So yes, I guess my answer is yes. It's still
And then for
work.
you, Gus, do you feel like you are giving your vehicles a second life?
Yeah, for sure. So, before I even like get into that, I want to say I completely agree with Brendan. Like, yeah, I feel like him and I can kind of relate to this, where you go into a car meet, and there's always guys who show up with like if you're going to a car meet, you're typically showing up with something unique. You're showing up because you've done some mods, you've gotten creative, you made some decisions. Sometimes you've spent some money, and sometimes you've spent some time, and sometimes you've spent both. It doesn't really matter at the end of the day. If you've made it unique, you're showing up to kind of show off what you've done, and that's cool. It doesn't really matter if it's new or if it's old. Um, but for the guys who like put a sticker on their window and show up to a car meet, just don't come anymore. Stop.
I agree.
Um, yeah, no, it like
So the culture is only accepting of guys that are willing to put in the blood, sweat, tears, the mindset of wanting to create your vehicle your own, so it reflects your identity, it reflects your culture, the history of the vehicle, if it's older or newer, the heritage.
It's just more favored to see someone's car roll in that's not just still factory from how it
yeah,
came
for
out.
sure.
Yeah, that they put the effort into making it very unique, and it's
Yeah.
like as we keep saying, it's like it's a reflection of their identity, and even the influences of their upbringing, their culture, like the culture of the car brand, right? Like there's so many things that go into it. It's truly unique. It's truly bespoke. uh, you know, we want to know what you guys think. For our listeners, we're about wrapping up here. Let us know what you think in the comments below. Are traditional craft skills obsolete, or can mass produce works, of art, or mass produce, products become works of art, artisan, bespoke products that reflect an individual? We want to know what you guys think, and comment below, like, subscribe. Thank you for watching it, guys.
Appreciate you guys' time.
Yeah. Thank you guys for
So-
coming on. And I think we're wrapping up on this one.